Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with, your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
The story of Kristin Smart has touched us all. The story of her enthusiastic spirit, her experience as a Cal Poly college student, her wonderful family. Her story has filled us all with determination, and as her family has long become a part of our community.
In May 1996, college freshman Kristin Smart vanished. The 19-year-old was dropped off by a friend at an off-campus party in San Luis Obispo, California. After leaving the party, Kristin was never seen alive again. The community looked everywhere for her, although authorities were initially slow to respond at first. Helicopters circled the skies. Law enforcement on horses navigated the terrain. Flyers and photos of Kristin went up all over town. Her family spent countless hours searching for her. Kristin's father later testified in court, "I spent 3 months down there looking for my daughter's remains, crawled through culverts, walked along the highway, looked many, many places. I could have been a tour guide." Volunteers joined in too. San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office, which eventually took over jurisdiction of the investigation, interviewed Kristin's friends and everyone who was at the party. Prosecutors would later tell a jury that somebody had been hunting Kristin at school. But as the years went by, no one was arrested. Until one day, in a courtroom, San Luis Obispo Deputy District Attorney Christopher Purvell told a jury, "You will hear that this case never went cold. This is a 25-year investigation, a case about persistence and perseverance." In July 2022, the case finally went to trial, but it wouldn't be an easy one for the prosecution.
There's a lot of things that went wrong with the initial investigation that contributed to the lack of physical evidence that could have or may have existed. So I think that's the biggest thing with this trial, and I think that's why it was so long, is because there are so many pieces that alone maybe are not strong, but together you start to see that bigger picture of like what the prosecution is trying to say.
This is Jillian, and in partnership with Law and Crime, you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 225. Kristin Smart was the oldest child of 3. She was born in Germany, while her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, taught the children of military personnel living overseas. Her parents described their daughter's adventurous spirit for the Kristin Smart Scholarship Fund they created in 2017. Kristin wanted to explore the world, and at a young age, she had already experienced more than what many people ever dream of. In high school, she spent a summer in London, and then another in Venezuela, where she learned Spanish and became a foreign exchange student. Her last summer before college, she landed a dream job working as a lifeguard and camp counselor in Hawaii. She loved the sun and the ocean. Although she could appear shy in new situations, she had an inner confidence that never held her back from any ambition she had, according to the website for the Kristin Smart Scholarship. There seemed to be a sweetness to Kristin, an inherent goodness. Even as she spent time far away from home, she seemed to remain close with her parents and her 2 younger siblings. Kristin wrote her brother Matt an IOU to let him know she would always be there for him. She was her sister Lindsay's biggest fan. Kristin once baked her a cake to celebrate Lindsay's performance at a swim meet. Now that Kristin was in college, she still called her family every Sunday. Her parents, brother, and sister looked forward to reconnecting with her every week. Before her disappearance, it seemed like the upcoming Sunday call was going to be joyful. She had left a voicemail on her mom's phone on Friday, May 24th, 1996. She teased that she had good news to share, but she didn't let it slip what it was. She sounded ecstatic. That was the last time Kristin's mom heard from her daughter. When it was time for the family ritual that Sunday, the phone was quiet. Kristin didn't call. By then, she was already missing. Kristin's mother, Denise Smart, testified later in court that she called the residence hall advisor, the university president's office, and 2 law enforcement agencies, but no one helped her. The San Luis Obispo Police Department and the San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's Office both told Denise that they didn't have jurisdiction over Cal Poly's campus, according to the San Luis Obispo Tribune. Denise even tried calling the FBI. It felt like the life of my daughter was of no value to anyone except our family, Denise said in court. On the night of the fateful party, it was cold outside, even though it was late May. One of those California coastal nights the prosecutor described as both dewy and humid. Kristin wasn't dressed warmly enough. She wore black shorts, a gray short-sleeved shirt, and red Puma shoes. She was casual and comfortable. She was going to a birthday party held off campus in a small, modest, 4-bedroom house with a brick chimney. There was a little tiki bar inside. The party was an informal get-together, attracting anywhere from 20 to 40 young people that Friday night of the Memorial Day weekend. Otherwise, campus was pretty quiet. Most of the students had gone home for the holiday. Kristin, after leaving the voicemail hinting about the good news she wanted to share, was in the mood to be social. None of Kristin's friends were at this party. There was no buddy system in place. She was on her own. Authorities pieced together the events of the party through interviews. A friend had dropped Kristin, who was sober, off at the party between 10 and 10:30 p.m., and she remembered watching Kristin walk up the street to the house. Other partygoers told investigators about seeing Kristin inside. One recalled her talking to a guy named Paul Flores in a corner by the bar. Kristin, only 19 and new to college life, appeared to be drunk. Another person, Tim Davis, saw her fall down and apparently knock Paul down with her. People helped Kristin back to her feet. Later in the night, Kristin struck up a friendly, flirty conversation with Matt Toomey and Ross Ketchum. Matt noticed Kristin was heavily intoxicated to the point where she was stumbling around, according to the prosecution. Another partygoer, Trevor Bolter, had a recollection of Kristin. Trevor and Kristin were talking together and kissed. Kristin pulled Trevor into the bathroom, Trevor said, and he remembered her primping in the mirror and asking him if he thought she was pretty. It was an innocent encounter, and Trevor and Kristin left the bathroom together. Paul Flores then appeared and asked what they were doing in there. Matt, who had spoken with Kristin earlier in the night, remembered seeing her again when he left the party around midnight or 12:30 a.m. He said she was lying in the neighbor's lawn. By this point, he saw Kristin Smart face down, incapacitated, in the dirt like that. Prosecutor Prevel later told the jury. He tried to talk to her. Hey, you can't stay here. It's midnight. It's cold. You're not dressed for this kind of weather. Barely unable to move, she said, just leave me here, face down in the dirt. Roughly 2 hours later, Kristin remained in the same position, face down, incapacitated, and unable to move. Prosecutor Prevel continued telling the jury what happened. Tim Davis saw her earlier fall to the ground after talking with Paul Flores, he said. And as he left the party at 2 o'clock, he was actually sober. because it was his role as an upperclassman to get a lot of the younger students home that night. And he remembers going up to Kristin and seeing her at 2 to 2:30. He says, "You can't stay here. You gotta go. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. You can't fall asleep here." So he and Cheryl Anderson help Kristin up. She leans up against him, puts her arm around him because she can't walk on her own. He and Cheryl Anderson have control of Kristin, and Cheryl lives in the dorms. Not the same one, but nearby, so they're going in the same direction. He told the jury that according to Tim, then, out of the darkness and the night, Paul Flores emerged. Tim Davis makes it maybe 100 yards and says, "I got to go back to the party because there are other people who need my help," Prosecutor Prevel said. "I'm essentially the responsible upperclassman here." And Paul Flores says, "Don't worry, I've got her. I'll take her from here. You don't have to worry at all." Paul Flores never asks Tim Davis where Kristin lived. Tim confirmed she could still barely walk, and she leaned heavily against him. Now Kristin just had Cheryl Anderson, and Cheryl Anderson at this point will confirm what Tim Davis said. Kristin was unable to walk on her own. She was incapacitated. And as they walk back from that health center towards the red brick dorms, Paul Flores kept telling Cheryl Anderson, "I got this. You can go on ahead. I got Kristin. I'll take her to her dorm room. Don't worry, I got this." She says, "No, I'm going to stay a little longer." So they keep going back up towards the red brick dorms, and he keeps telling her, "I got this. I got Kristin. You can move along now." Cheryl Anderson stays with them. Then, at the intersection of Perimeter and Grand, it's essentially a square intersection where you can go off in two directions. It's time for Cheryl Anderson to leave. Paul Flores asks her for a kiss. She refuses. And then a hug, and she refuses. Creeped out, she makes a decision she's regretted ever since. She left. She was the last person, other than Paul Flores, to see Kristin Smart alive. And she sees Paul Flores taking Kristin Smart to the left of Perimeter and Grand, towards his dorm room. From the location where she last sees them, Paul Flores' dorm goes to the left. Kristin's goes to the right. But we know Kristin never made it home that night, he said. It wouldn't take long before the alarm sounded that something was terribly wrong. Kristin's roommate, Crystal Kelvin, had a friend, Jana, staying over in the dorm that night. Jana noticed how messy Kristin's side of the room was. Missing was Kristin. Crystal Kelvin came back to the room later on Saturday and said, "That's odd. Kristin never came back," Prosecutor Prevel said. "Her makeup bag is there. Her hairbrush is there. Her backpack is there. All of the stuff that Kristin would normally take if she was going away for the weekend was all there. All Kristin had on her was literally the clothes on her back." Kristin's friends panicked. They called the school's police department on Sunday, but it took until Monday for someone to respond. Law enforcement later checked Kristin's dorm room and found her social security card, her checkbook, her ID, her valuables. Meanwhile, Paul Flores was unaccounted for between 2:30 a.m. Saturday morning through Saturday night. Paul's roommate was gone for the holiday weekend and didn't return back to their dorm until Tuesday, according to the prosecution. On Sunday, May 26th, Paul called his father, Ruben Flores, at 9:47 a.m. Otherwise, he didn't call anyone from his dorm room on Saturday or Monday. On Sunday evening, Paul's friend, Jeremy Moon, noticed that Paul had a slight black eye. The bruise was underneath his right eye. Then on Monday, May 27th, Paul played basketball. Paul was interviewed by law enforcement multiple times, and the more he spoke, the more his story changed. On May 28th, Paul told campus police that Kristin was struggling to walk at the party, and he promised Cheryl Anderson he would walk Kristin back to the dorm room. Paul said he wasn't romantically interested in Kristin. He omitted from the story that he had asked Cheryl for a hug or tried to kiss her when they parted ways. Later, Paul was interviewed again, twice more, by Detective Mike Kennedy from the Sheriff's Department. The first thing the detective noticed, he said Paul Flores was nervous and his heart was beating out of his chest. Detective Kennedy saw the bruise on his eye, Prosecutor Prevel said. Paul initially claimed the bruise happened during basketball. Then he told the police he got it when he was working on his truck. He later told somebody else he woke up with it. And he eventually also claimed he got pushed at a party and got hurt then. As the prosecution put it, no reason to lie unless you got it during the killing and burying of Kristin Smart. Paul told Detective Kennedy he didn't know Kristin by name and he wasn't familiar with her. He never explained to Detective Kennedy if he didn't know her, how would he know where she lived to return her to her dorm room, Prosecutor Prevel noted. Detective Kennedy circled back with Paul a few days later, curious to talk to him again. And this time, Paul Flores claims that he didn't know how they ended up walking together. It just happened. He claims there was no physical contact between himself and Kristin Smart at that party, even though multiple witnesses saw them fall down together, Prosecutor Prevel said. Paul tells Detective Kennedy, I did not find Kristin Smart attractive. Not at all. Zero interest in her, Prosecutor Prevel said. He even claims he wasn't sure about the location of the dorm. He again tells Detective Kennedy, I just don't know how I ended up walking with Kristin Smart. I just don't know. But now he tells Detective Kennedy she was walking just fine. I didn't have to hold her up at all. She was walking perfectly fine on the way back. He tells the detective, I was not helping her walk home. That's, of course, a different version of events from what Paul told campus police. Remember, he had initially said Kristin was struggling to walk that night. Prosecutor Prevel said, Paul Flores had his dorm room that entire 3-day weekend. His roommate was gone and he was headed in the direction of his dorm room and he slipped and told Mike Kennedy, when we got back to the dorm. Now, what happened in the privacy of his room that night? Only 2 people were there and only one walked out. Investigators viewed Paul's dorm room as a crime scene and Paul as a person of interest. They tested his canvas mattress cover at a lab in the Bay Area. They could see a light brown stain in the upper right-hand corner. An analyst determined it tested positive for human blood, but the analyst had done a presumptive test, so the results were not definite. Further confirmatory testing was required, but the analyst had to make a choice. Either do the full test, which could mean destroying the sample, or just test it for DNA. According to the prosecution, the analyst apparently wasn't able to do both. The analyst opted to do the DNA testing instead. And what she found was that Kristin Smart could not be included in the sample, but could not be excluded from it either, Prosecutor Prevel said. By then, weeks had gone by since Kristin went missing. In late June of that year, investigators brought in 4 cadaver dogs and Adela Morris, a dog handler with 35 years of experience leading canines to find human remains. Adela's secret weapon was her dog, Chola. At that time, in 1996, the standard was that the dogs would go in blindly, searching the entire dorm. Adela didn't know any details of the case, so there was no way to influence where the dogs searched or found a hit. They were free to just follow their noses wherever it led them. Go find human remains, Adela instructed Chola. The dog roamed past the dormitory's common areas, the bathrooms, and the other dorm rooms. Chola ran down the hallway, made a U-turn, and stopped in front of Paul Flores' dorm, and then made the sign with her head that she got a hit. Chola gave what Adela described as one of the strongest alerts she had ever seen Chola make, right at the corner of Paul's mattress. The other 3 dogs behaved similarly when it was their turn, and Adela let them off the leash. The dog smelled human death on Paul's bed. The prosecution had a theory, one they explained to the court. Paul had taken the intoxicated Kristin back to his dorm room because he was going to try to rape her, or he did rape her, and somehow Kristin ended up dead. That's how he had gotten the bruise underneath his eye. That's why he was so nervous when he was being interviewed by the detectives, because Kristin's lifeless body had been laying in his dorm room on his mattress days earlier. And that's why Paul called his dad Reuben on Sunday morning, according to prosecutors. He needed help getting rid of her body. Some fathers would do anything for their sons, Prosecutor Prevel said. Paul Flores was backtracking his story when he told the detective he didn't know Kristin. He wasn't sure of her name. That was clearly a lie. Investigators spoke to others, like Steve Fleming, a basketball player at the school who was friends with Kristin. Kristin and Steve had become close and shared deep conversations about life and the challenges of that first year away at school. Steve told police he previously recognized Paul from seeing him inside Kristin's dorm. Prosecutor Prevel told the jury, Steve Fleming noticed that Paul Flores would try to get Kristin's attention. He would seek her out, and she was too nice, too kind-hearted to tell him off. Remember, 1996 was before the Me Too movement, and he never once saw Kristin give Paul Flores attention back. And he recalls on at least one occasion he saw Paul Flores inside Kristin's dorm room. Steve knew Kristin well enough, and he could tell she was uncomfortable with the situation. Paul was an unwanted guest in her room. Steve told investigators that after Kristin disappeared, Paul stopped visiting the dorm room. After Memorial Day weekend, he never saw Paul Flores back at the dorms. Once Kristin was gone, Paul's hunt was over, Prosecutor Prevel said. One of Kristin's closest friends, Vanessa, confirmed Steve's account. Vanessa had seen Paul be unnaturally interested in their group. He was always staring at them. And again, she said Kristin was too sweet to tell him to go away. Later that summer, after Kristin disappeared, a 17-year-old girl named Jennifer Hudson was at a gathering that Paul was at when a reference to Kristin Smart happened to play on the news. Jennifer heard Paul tell another person at the party, "That bitch dick tease, I had enough of her shit and I buried her under my place in Wasena." Jennifer was terrified. She kept it to herself at the time. But decades later, she would testify in a courtroom.
Her testimony was really strong. She was crying during it. She said that when he told her that in 1996, that he was cold, had no smirk, no smile, no, not like he was being sarcastic or had a distorted sense of humor. She said his eyes were like a dead person's eyes, and that she thought that he was 1,000% serious.
Jennifer saw Paul again a short time later.
She had acquaintances ask her to drive them to a ramp, or a skateboarding ramp in Wasna. And they said that they were meeting my friend Paul, and she didn't know, she wasn't given a last name or anything. And so she followed the truck, and it was a white truck. And then at that place, there was a skateboard ramp, and she recognized Paul Flores. And she said in her head, she was like, this could be where Kristin is buried, because he said my place in Wasna, and we're in Wasna. And she said she was so frightened that she threw up on her shoes and just drove away and ditched her friends. My name is Chloe Jones, and I cover courts, crimes, and investigations for the San Luis Obispo Tribune, which is the local paper in San Luis Obispo County.
You'll hear Chloe talk about this case and the later trial throughout the episode. 8 years passed since Jennifer had that encounter with Paul Flores. Jennifer was now in her 20s, and one night was having a few drinks with her friend, Justin Goodwin. She's been holding on to this secret for a long time, Prosecutor Prevel said. With a little bit of liquid courage, she tells Justin Goodwin what she heard. And Justin Goodwin submits an anonymous tip to the sheriff's department almost 18 years ago. It took Justin a year to report what Jennifer told him confidentially. I stewed on the information for a long time, Justin later testified, whether I should betray our friendship and our trust, because I wasn't sure if she would ever talk to me again. The tip was another piece of ammunition in the ongoing investigation into Paul Flores. But the 1990s passed, bringing in the new millennium, and still, Paul hadn't been arrested or charged with murder. He was out in society, living his life. And according to the prosecution, he was also committing new, horrific crimes. In their opening statements, the prosecution told the stories of 3 women who had been sexually assaulted by Paul Flores during the 2000s. The following is from the prosecutor in his own words. Warning, this is tough to hear and involves description of violent rape, so listener discretion is advised. Quote, in Los Angeles County, there are many, many bars. Many bars where at closing time presents opportunity if somebody is looking for it. In 2007, at closing time, at the conclusion of a social function, Rachel Doe encounters Paul Flores. January 16, 2007, she went to the BAC Street Lounge in Redondo Beach. She was having drinks with her friends during the course of the night, playing pool, but she went outside to smoke a cigarette and left her drink unattended, came back in, finished the drink, and doesn't remember the rest of the night. She wakes up in a strange house, completely naked. She knew something was put in her drink because she had never felt that way before. She knew something was wrong. She let her work know, I can't come in, something is wrong. She was taken to the hospital by a friend, where a sexual assault exam was performed, and findings consistent with a sexual assault were made. And they took a DNA swab from her vagina, came back positive for Paul Flores. Now in 2008, you go to the Thirsty Club. Rhonda Doe was at the Thirsty Club near Lawndale. These bars are all a mile or 2 from each other, near where Paul Flores lived in San Pedro at the time. At closing time, Rhonda needed a ride home, and Paul Flores tells her, I can get you home. But they make a stop at his place. Sound familiar? At his place, he gives her a glass of water. She barely remembers anything after that. She remembers being raped. She remembers being sodomized. She remembers a red ball gag with black straps being forced into her mouth. Said she would never have consented to any of this. She said he was about 5'7", 5'8", 160 pounds. And of the hazy memory that she does have, she remembers sobbing to herself with the ball gag in her mouth while she was sodomized. Later, in her phone, she found a phone number to Paul Flores. She was shown a 6-pack photo lineup, which is a group of 6 photographs, and she identified the defendant, Paul Flores, but said she wasn't 100% certain. And then, when shown a photograph of his unique driveway to his residence at the time, she said, that's it. That's where I was taken. I remember that driveway. And then in 2011, Crimson Bar. Again, same general area, Lawndale, San Pedro, South Los Angeles County. At closing time, Paul Flores invited Sarah back to his house. She drove herself and remembers the house being very, very cluttered, almost like a hoarder's house. And her memory goes fuzzy. She says, I was either given something to drink or was given something. She can't remember because she was drugged. She went in and out of consciousness while Paul Flores was having sex with her without her consent, which is rape. She was not drunk but felt tired and limp. And the pain came more and more as Paul Flores became more and more aggressive with her. He reached into his dresser and pulled out a red ball gag with black straps. She got nervous. She was afraid of what he was going to do, so he held her down and forced it into her mouth. She tried to move her head side to side to prevent it, but she was having trouble breathing. She said it looked like he was enjoying her pain. In the morning, as she left, she told him, When someone says no, it means no. And again, Paul Flores hung his head in shame. Two of the women who accused Paul of raping them testified under pseudonyms at his murder trial.
Both women, there was jurors crying during their testimonies. Both women were very powerful. They were heavily cross-examined by Paul's lawyer, Robert Sanger.
Paul's lawyer apparently went on one of the women's social media pages. The woman had just turned 21 around the time of the alleged rape.
He was like, you were posting a lot about alcohol at that time. Like, alcohol was a big part of your life. Like, you drank a lot, like almost trying to be like, you drank a lot. This is part of you. So like, how could you remember? Every person is so different. Every jury is so different. And you don't know what's going to resonate with jurors.
Kristin Smart had disappeared in 1996, a different world than today. Prosecutor Prevel reminded the jury what life was like back then. iPhones wouldn't be invented for another 10 years. Fast forward to modern times, where millions of people tune into true crime podcasts like this one. And one podcast played a big role in helping law enforcement solve the case and bringing a flood of public interest back on Kristin Smart. Chris Lambert, who grew up near San Luis Obispo, drove by a billboard one day with Kristin Smart's face on it. Her death felt personal to him. He was frustrated that no one, after all this time, had been arrested. The case seemed to be stagnant and stuck, he felt, in 2017 and 2018. So in 2019, he released an independent podcast called Your Own Backyard that began exploring the murder investigation and who Kristin Smart was. He read through old newspaper clippings and began getting people to talk to him. The podcast was a hit. Your Own Backyard took on a life of its own. It was almost like a police investigation itself. People started reaching out to Chris, suddenly eager to share what they knew, all these years later.
The law enforcement and Kristin's family have credited podcaster Chris Lambert with cracking this case. He brought forward new witnesses and brought just new focus onto the case. And his podcast became very, very popular. At one point, he was the number one podcast on Apple Podcasts.
Paul Flores and his family were aware of the podcast, too. By 2019, law enforcement had a wire on Paul and overheard a conversation where his mother, Susan, encouraged Paul to listen to the podcast and to poke holes in it. Prosecutor Prevel noted that never in the conversation did Paul say he hadn't killed Kristin. Paul's attorney argued that exchange between Paul and his mom was only a snippet from a 27-minute conversation. He attacked Chris Lambert during the trial, calling him obsessed with Paul and with making Kristin's disappearance his life's work. Paul's attorney also used the podcast to try and poke holes at the prosecution's witnesses. Were they just talking because they wanted to get on the podcast and become famous?
Everyone that is testifying was influenced by this podcast, that this podcast was out to get Paul and that this podcast was designed to convict him and that it made this an unfair trial.
And that included Jennifer Hudson, who is an important part of the prosecution's case. Remember, Jennifer claimed she once heard Paul say he had had enough of Kristin's shit and had buried her under his house.
That was probably the biggest witness, and she's also the closest thing to absolutely direct evidence that the prosecution has. The defense was trying to say that that Jennifer was influenced by the podcast, and she made it up because she wanted some kind of fame from the podcast or something like that.
Where was Kristin Smart's body all this time? It was 2020 and she still hadn't been found. Authorities believed she had been buried under the house of Ruben Flores, who was Paul's father. Ruben lived less than 25 minutes south from San Luis Obispo. His house was an attractive gray 4-bedroom home with trees out front. It had been built in 1991, and if you tried to buy it today, it would cost more than $1 million in the California real estate market. Over the years, some recounted suspicious moments at the property, like Angie, who had dated Paul around 2003 and 2004. Prosecutor Prevel said Angie went out back by the avocado trees, which are near the stairs off of the deck. And as she went to go walk near those avocado trees, between those trees and the deck, which is covered by lattice, both Paul Flores and Ruben Flores immediately intervene and say, "You've got to get out of here. You've got to move," redirected her away from that location, back to the front of the house, and stayed with her until she got up out of that location and went back to the front of the house. The evidence will show that under that deck, behind that avocado tree, is just about the perfect place to hide a body. Nobody was allowed under the deck, said Ruben's former roommate. The longtime roommate who lived with Ruben for 10 years called the area under the deck a no-go zone. The plumbers weren't allowed down there, and definitely not Ruben's roommate. Ruben's roommate said he once tried to store some large 55-gallon drums down there, and Ruben ordered him to remove them. Authorities obtained a search warrant for Ruben's property on February 5th, 2020. When they searched Ruben's bedroom, they found what seemed like a weird shrine to Kristin Smart. There were missing posters, mail, letters from the Smart family begging for help to find her back. He kept everything over 24 years, Prosecutor Prevel said. 5 days after the search warrant, a neighbor reported seeing a cargo trailer being backed into the side yard of the house. The door to the cargo trailer was pointed towards the deck of Ruben's home. The neighbor had enough wits to take a picture of the scene. In March 2021, another search warrant was executed. This time, called to the scene was ground-penetrating radar archaeologist Phil Haynes. He rolled a device over the land that sent radar impulses down and bouncing up again. It showed what was underneath the soil, and sure enough, it found anomalies. Cadaver dogs were also called in, and while they didn't give off a full-blown alert, their behavior changed, which both the prosecution and the defense would later argue over the significance of that. Law enforcement was ready to dig. Kristin's body nor her remains were found. But authorities believed they had found evidence that at one time her body had been buried there. About 2 feet down, they found dark staining, consistent with organic decomposition, according to forensic archaeologist Cindy Arrington, who testified at trial. Arrington told the jury that the area was excavated, something was put in, leaked fluid, and then was dug back out, leaving the fluid there. She said since no bones were found, she believed the body had been wrapped in a semi-permeable item, like a tarp, with a little bit of seepage of decomposition fluid. She told the court she saw what's called a cadaver soak stain, where the fluid leaks around the body. On April 27, 2021, San Luis Obispo County District Attorney Dan Dow held a press conference to announce 2 arrests in the case.
This morning, I am announcing the filing of a felony criminal complaint against 2 men, Paul Flores and his father, Ruben Flores. The charge against Paul Flores is murder. It is alleged that Mr. Flores caused the death of Kristin Smart while in the commission of or attempted rape. That is first-degree murder under California law. Ruben is charged with accessory after the fact to murder. The allegation against Ruben is that he helped to conceal Kristin's body after the murder was committed. These charges mark a major milestone. For more than 2 decades, 3 sheriffs, 3 district attorneys, and countless investigators have worked to bring justice to Kristin Smart.
Reporters asked how hard it would be to prosecute murder without Kristin's body.
No body homicides are obviously complicated and difficult, but they're no less important. In fact, they're incredibly important for the victim's family because they want closure as do the Smarts in this case. So they're complicated, they're difficult, but we don't make a decision to file unless we believe we can prove the case. And so our team of exceptional professionals and very experienced prosecutors and investigators are going to do everything we can to solve this case successfully and hold Mr. Flores accountable for the murder of Kristin Smart.
He was also asked if it would be hard to prosecute a case as old as this one. Over time, memories fade, witnesses forget, maybe some even pass away. The college students at that party would now be in their 40s. But Dow sounded confident about pursuing criminal charges against the two men. Another question would soon arise. Could they seat a fair and impartial jury? The disappearance of Kristin Smart had been covered on the local television stations and newspapers. It had appeared on the major networks and national programs like 48 Hours. And a new generation may have heard about it for the first time or learned the full details on the viral Your Own Backyard podcast. A judge decided no, an untainted jury pool was going to be impossible to find in San Luis Obispo County. And so the trial was moved 150 miles away to Monterey County. Now, it's worth noting over all these years that there had been some other developments in this story. In 2002, Kristin Smart was declared legally dead. Her parents had also turned to the civil courts for justice and filed lawsuits against the Flores family. Opening statements for Paul's criminal trial began on July 18, 2022. His father, Ruben, would be tried at the same time, but Paul and Ruben had their own juries who heard each case's opening and closing arguments independently from each other. The two juries heard nearly identical evidence over the 3-month-long trial. The two juries also had different makeups. According to the Tribune, Paul's jury was comprised of more females who were younger, while Ruben's jury was comprised of more males who were older. Paul's defense attorney, Robert Sanger, argued that there was no evidence tying his client to the murder during his opening statements. This obviously is a tragic situation in one sense or another, he said. Kristin Smart has never returned home. It's believed, probably by now, that she is deceased, but there's no evidence of what happened to her. There's no evidence of what happened to her after Paul Flores left her at the dorms. He told them that law enforcement was aware that they had no eyewitnesses, that a body was not recovered, that there was no physical evidence and no forensic evidence, and that they've been aware of that for some time. He said the case isn't what it seemed to be.
One of the defense's arguments was that there was no evidence besides he was the last person to see her, and anything could have happened to her after her and Paul parted ways.
The defense's strategy in their opening statements appeared to be to attack the victim. Whatever you think about Paul Flores' behavior in recent years, that does not supply actual facts of what happened back in the time, Sanger said. The problem is, though, that you're going to hear evidence about Kristin Smart. It's not nice to talk about somebody who's not here to defend herself. The people have indicated they wanted to present evidence that she was from a closely knit, tight-knit family, that everything was wonderful. And it wasn't, unfortunately. Kristin Smart was engaged in at-risk behavior. He told the jury, I think what you'll really hear is a number of witnesses who said she was likely to get into a car with a guy and go off. She had a history of going off with men, including older men. Kristin's parents, according to the defense, were at their wits' end with their daughter because she was failing out of school and couldn't hold down a job. Sanger then painted a picture of Paul, under constant pressure for a quarter century. The defense also tried to poke holes in the expert testimony regarding the stain found in the dirt under Ruben's deck. Remember, there had been no bones found, no fibers, nor hair. The prosecution's expert believed there was a tarp or semi-permeable wrapping protecting the body, but the defense argued there was no proof of that. No tarp had ever been found to be collected for evidence and analyzed. It was just a theory with no concrete proof, as far as the defense was concerned. The point is, there's no evidence of any semi-permeable anything, Sanger said. If there is a tarp or if there is something there, you would expect at least part of the tarp or part of the wrap would be evident from fibers and something else, and we don't have that. The defense also tried to cast doubt on the cadaver dog's results. The dog trainers, after all, were only volunteers. They weren't officially part of law enforcement. From a forensic standpoint, a forensic science standpoint, you'll hear that a dog alert is nothing other than a clue, Sanger said. And as for some of the witnesses the prosecution was calling to the stand, Justin Goodwin, the man who shared Jennifer Hudson's secret and reported Paul's confession to police, well, he said Justin was out for a $75,000 reward. He also had a vendetta against Paul, since Justin was co-moderator of the Kristin Smart Facebook page. And the neighbor who took a picture of the trailer at the Flores' property, he said the trailer actually belonged to the boyfriend of Paul's mom. He had cancer and was parking his trailer there because he wasn't going to be needing it. The question is whether or not the evidence shows that there was a rape, attempted rape, or a murder. And I'll submit to you that there is no evidence of any of those things, all the innuendo notwithstanding, Sanger said. And at the end of this, we'll hear all the evidence. You're the ones that are going to be the judges, but I'm going to ask you to find Paul Flores not guilty. In the prosecution's opening statements, they laid out the timeline and their evidence, much of what you heard throughout this episode already. During the trial, some members of the jury had a visible reaction after the prosecution's expert testified that there were traces of human blood found in the soil samples taken from under Ruben's deck.
And that testimony in particular was very moving to Paul Flores' jurors. One juror during that testimony actually began loudly, audibly crying during that. And then we had to excuse everybody and take a recess and then reset to continue testimony.
A forensic scientist also testified that within those soil samples appeared red, black, and blue fibers. Kristin had been wearing red shoes, black shorts, and a gray shirt when she disappeared. But the defense called an expert witness to dispute that a body had ever been buried in a grave under Ruben's deck. That stain left in the soil from a decomposing body? David Carter, director and a professor of forensic sciences at a university in Honolulu, told the jury it looked more like a high concentration of iron and clay in sandy soil. The color changes could also be related to the decomposition of organic matter, but this is not clearly supported by the nutrient levels presented, Carter testified. But Paul being the last one seen with Kristin, the stain, the soil samples, his inconsistent interviews, the sexual assault victims, everything was one piece that fit the puzzle, at least according to the prosecution.
One of the main arguments throughout the whole trial is that each of these pieces of evidence might not be strong alone, but when you put everything together, it could make the case a lot stronger. The defense argued that if you have to do that much work to make a case make sense, that it should be a not guilty verdict. They argued that showed that the case was too circumstantial and that there was actually no compelling evidence.
Paul's jury found him guilty. It had taken almost 3 decades, but the Smart family had finally received some sort of justice for their daughter's murder. But minutes after Paul's verdict, the second jury found Ruben Flores not guilty of helping his son cover up the crime. 81-year-old Ruben told the media outside the courtroom, "You look through it and there is no evidence against anybody, me or Paul. There wasn't any time. Just too much made-up stuff. It's too bad that sometimes the system works that way, on feelings instead of facts." One of the jurors from Ruben's trial told the Tribune of San Luis Obispo that there wasn't enough hard evidence to convict Ruben. "I can't sleep and say, I'm going to go put somebody in prison because of the little things that the prosecutor was throwing out there," the juror said. "For me, it just wasn't enough." The juror also said he felt Paul's jury had gotten the verdict wrong. Kristin's father, San Smart, also spoke to reporters after the verdicts.
You all recognize this. Without Kristin, there is no joy or happiness in this verdict. After 26 years with today's split verdicts, we learned that our quest for justice for Kristin will continue. This has been an agonizingly long journey with more downs than ups, but we are grateful and appreciate the diligence and energy of the two juries to thoroughly review the facts and reach their decisions. Our faith in the justice system has been renewed by their commitment and effort.
But this story isn't over yet. Paul, now age 45, is scheduled to be sentenced in March 2023. Paul's attorney, who unsuccessfully asked for a mistrial 9 times during Paul's trial, is filing a motion for a new trial. The defense said he also has new information to present to the court.
The motion will be argued on March 10th, and if the judge denies that motion, then Paul will be sentenced right after. And he faces either 25 years to life in prison or life without parole. The judge can use her discretion as to which one she places on him.
Kristin's family is continuing their civil litigation against the Flores family. In the meantime, law enforcement has vowed to keep searching for Kristin, to find her body and bring her home.
Even though Paul was convicted today, this case is not over. This case will not be over until Kristin is returned home. And we have committed to that from the beginning. And I remain committed to that fact that we don't take a breath. We do not put this aside. We continue to pursue this until we bring Kristin home to the family.
And that's all for this episode. As always, I'd love to know what you think about this case. You can let me know by joining the conversation on Instagram @CourtJunkie, by tweeting us @CourtJunkiePod, or by emailing us at podcast@CourtJunkie.com. This episode was researched and written by Gabrielle Russon. If you'd like to hear these episodes without the ads, hear additional Court Junkie bonus episodes, and receive our weekly newsletter covering the most fascinating court cases of the week, please check out our Patreon options at CourtJunkie.com/support. And don't forget to check out Court Junkie's sister podcast, Civil, which covers cases that go through our civil court system. Catch recent episodes on Hulk Hogan and the alleged I-10 shooter and Rebecca Zahau. Search for Civil wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.